I know everyone wanted to hear that drop just as much as I did, but we're about to drop some hot shit, so I thought I'd drop this instead. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Welcome to AI-powered workflows, where we'll teach you how to leverage AI to love your work again. If you missed last week's session and the session before that, no worries. We'll recap a little bit of the content, but as usual, we'll spend a lot of our time really focusing on the product, showing you what workflows is, how we can actually use workflows, and actually some of the best practices to use along the way. On top of that, we'll also be sure to share some best practices. So we heard your feedback from the last session, so to speak. We'll go through a simple use case first, and then actually use it to reinforce some of the things that you can use to build your own workflows and be significantly better off and really getting a step ahead. Big picture though, it probably merits to make sense about really what we're even discussing today and why we're qualified and why we even built the topic or built the platform in the first place. I won't start with three numbers, but if you've been to one of our webinars before, you know that one of the coolest things about Copy.ai is actually we have 10 million customers. We've done that in about 30 months now, and it's all powered by only 36 people. And by itself, those numbers are staggering and probably make you wonder, how are they doing so much? We're leveraging AI to be able to scale our growth. In fact, that has actually been the mission at Copy.ai since day zero, helping you go from 0% of your business being run on AI to 50, 60, or even 80%. This is foundationally really what point solutions struggle to be able to do. Ultimately, we can have things that maybe work in the lab and maybe impact a small percentage of the business, but they fall short in actually delivering on the real goals, right? How do we actually operationalize this technology, get into the hands of the people that have the problems and use it in a way to actually allow us to love our work again and actually scale some of the activities that are otherwise what traditionally we think of as white collar assembly line work, so to speak. And whereas chat is probably the product that you're most familiar with today, that is really designed to help us get closer to this goal, to immediately give every one of us the ability to get assistance with ad hoc tasks. How do we actually do the things that we need to do on a day-to-day faster by having an AI sidekick that can help us get through a lot of day-to-day? Yet, when you actually zoom out, it still requires manual intervention. It requires prompt engineering and someone to actually do the work. So we think while chat's great, it certainly is designed for you to be able to solve a lot of the ad hoc problems that you might run into in a day-to-day, that it falls short of actually the promise of AI, right? Not making us 100% better at doing the same things faster, but actually fundamentally removing work off of our plates so that we can scale and leverage AI to do the things that otherwise allow us to focus on the things that actually matter. This is where the workflows platform comes in. It's built from the ground up to help you actually take some of the more complex tasks that you're probably doing in chat today and actually help you automate them end to end. And we think the next step in helping you create a systematic adoption of AI across the business. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, this is a cool graphic and helps me conceptually understand what a workflow is. But what is actually a workflow? It's a series of AI steps that encapsulate your process and allow you to run it repeatedly at scale. Think about it like this. There's probably a number of things that you're probably doing in chat today that require multiple turns of a conversation that are the kinds of things that you're doing over and over again. Think about this example, right? On the left, you see me effectively asking about learning about a person and scraping information from their LinkedIn profile. This is often a first step for doing things like lead enrichment, doing things like writing personalized outreach copy that we could then send as a part of sales messaging. But ultimately, this is something that doesn't really scale very well, right? If either of us suddenly felt like the entirety of our day should actually be spent talking to a chatbot, processing a lead list of 1,000+ people, and writing personalized messaging to them, we're probably in for a rough day, right? That doesn't actually allow us to achieve our goals. So what workflows allows us to do is actually take that same concept, right? Workflow prompt chaining, and actually turn it into a series of AI steps, which can be followed at scale. On the right-hand side here, we actually have those exact steps that I was intending to follow on the left in chat. We're going to scrape someone's profile. We're going to generate the pain points. We're going to understand everything that we need to about the prospect, and then write personalized outbound emails to them. Now, the next question, probably this sounds hard, right? I don't know how to code. I don't really consider myself a automation engineer. What if I told you that all it actually takes to be able to create workflows is a understanding of how to describe your process? In fact, this terrible screenshot that you're seeing here is actually the exact prompt that I used to generate the workflow that you saw on the right. So if you found yourself being very effective at being able to describe what your business process is, workflows is something that's immediately accessible for you. And the dream and the vision behind this product is actually making it so that every single person with a problem no longer has to be stapled to a project manager, an engineer, or a number of other people in the business in order to be able to get things done, and thereby unleashing creativity across the business and enabling you to get the things that you need to get done faster, encoding your best practices along the way. We'll walk through a lot of best practices today as well in terms of how to use workflows. But as a reminder, we can actually also think through ways that you can actually leverage workflows after they've been built. We've designed this platform to scale with your generative AI strategy. So there's multiple ways that once you've created a workflow that you can think about actually using it. First, and probably most obviously, importing and exporting CSVs or Excel files. Imagine having a list of 10,000 records that you need to process. You can just upload the entire list instead of having to go through it manually in chat or solve it through another way. Forms are another thing that we're going to walk through today. You can think of these as basically being simple inputs, very similar to the tools that we had in Copy.ai 1.0, that actually allow you to basically give anyone the ability to use your workflow, embed it on public websites, embed it in turn as internal tools, and make it really easy for, even if you're running it just once, to not have to reinvent the wheel. And then, of course, the bigger picture here is actually a platform that allows you to integrate with the rest of the business. This is really what the API capability offers. And one thing that you should know is every single workflow out of the box comes with an API and allows you to effectively integrate AI, not by logging into Copy.ai and effectively using some other interface, but actually by bringing generative AI to the systems where you're already needing that assistance. So to dive a little bit deeper, one of the first things that you'll encounter as you start building your own workflows is actually the builder interface. It actually is designed to basically look just like a chatbot prompt. We'll look at it in just a second, but the first prompt that you'll need to write is a builder prompt. And this is really the initial set of blueprints that we're providing to the workflow engine in order to be able to actually construct the end-to-end process. This is not the same as the individual prompts that are generated later. But what we wanted to share was a few best practices that can actually help you get more from less. These are a few questions. Again, I won't walk through all of them, but it's important to think about workflows as what are your inputs and what are you ultimately trying to create? And what are also the steps that you would want the workflow to follow in order to be able to actually accomplish that goal? One of the most important questions that you would probably want to ask yourself is, how would you actually describe this task to a coworker that was unfamiliar with the task? Because oftentimes what takes a workflow from good to great is actually looking at what we're overlooking. We'll look at a few different ways that you can actually prompt workflows today, but the basic structure that you can all adopt today, which will make all of your lives a lot easier, is given the inputs, please do the things, right? Those are just blanks, obviously, that you need to fill in. But I find that when you actually frame a workflow from this perspective and structure your prompts this way, you're actually going to have a leg up in the process of actually being able to define what that workflow is and thinking through some of the questions that are intuitively called to fruition above. Now, when you submit a workflow prompt, what's actually happening behind the scenes is the workflow builder is doing all of the heavy lifting for you. It's going to understand your request, determine the process, assemble something we call actions in order to be able to actually do the thing that you want to do. And then it'll actually also generate all the prompts that you would need in order to be able to ultimately have a workflow that accomplishes that end. The action library is a really important concept behind the scenes, and we thought we'd add on a little bit to give you a sense of really what's possible. There are really two kinds of steps that are important to think about. There's AI actions as well as procedural actions. And these are the things that we're building behind the scenes all of the time. And you can think about an action as a discrete series of things that a workflow knows how to be able to do, that our builder is aware of, that it can leverage in order to be able to produce what you actually need. We've called out a few of the actions here and provided a brief synopsis of what they are. Most of the AI actions are pretty intuitive, right? Summarizing things, we've all had to do that in a homework assignment or as a part of our day-to-day. Reasoning is a really important aspect, which allows us to actually, instead of providing an input, have the AI come up with what the input should be. Classification tasks are very common as well and can help you do things like categorize information. Organization tasks are also equally as important so that you can actually classify and then logically structure something so that it can help with a future step or just give you something more organized in the end. Extraction steps are incredibly helpful for being able to take data out of a larger context. So as an example, getting something specific out of a web page or getting something specific out of a transcript. And then, of course, writing steps can actually help us use the inputs to generate net new content, do things like write social posts or even just a response to a user if that's how your workflow intends to be used. And then there's a couple of other procedural actions here that are important to call out. We can find information on the public web using our search action, and we can also scrape content directly from the page. Soon, you'll be able to integrate. We have a few actions that are coming soon, which are actually the ability to integrate and touch other systems across the business, as well as do things like search and store information. More on that soon, but the important thing to note here is that there's a lot of actions that we've already built out for you. And by thinking about these actions as you're building workflows, you can actually have a leg up in understanding how best to communicate what you need and also, of course, have a sense for what's possible. All right, I promised we'd be brief. So let's actually jump into the product and give you a sense of what workflows can do. And as promised, I'll start with something simple here so that we can all get a sense of what building a workflow feels like and what the process really can mean for you, especially if you're just getting started. So let's start with a pretty basic prompt here. Given a URL to a blog post, please scrape the blog post, then summarize the blog post, then create 5 Twitter posts, 5 LinkedIn posts, and 5 Facebook posts to promote it. Kind of thing that you could probably do relatively easily as well. But as we'll layer on functionality, we will see why this can get extremely complex and be extremely valuable. So we're starting here in the Builder tab. If you're trying to follow along and don't know how to get here, you just expand the Workflows section. You can either click New Workflow here or New Workflow here, and you'll immediately get to the Builder tab. When we're thinking about workflow builder prompts, this is really the section that we're referring to. So I'm just going to hit Go here, and we'll actually see the process that we were pointing out in action. In fact, I don't really need to show you the slides. I can just talk through it. What our platform's actually doing behind the scenes is reading those instructions, understanding them, thinking through what actions are actually going to be relevant in order to be able to actually do the thing that we want. And we're actually leveraging an agent, if you're an AI nerd like I am, to assemble all the steps for you. And so looks like it actually did exactly what we wanted. And the first thing that I'd recommend when we actually have created a workflow is actually to start by testing it. Now, I'm going to publish this so that all of you can actually check out this workflow and follow along. I'll point out a few other capabilities of a published workflow before we get to optimizing it. First is forms. I called this out a moment ago, but if we actually enable the share button here and also change a couple of the settings, what we can actually do is ensure that instead of just getting a confirmation thank you page, which would make sense if this was like a form on your website, instead just give you the actual content that we want at the end. So in this case, the summary of the blog post, the Twitter post, the LinkedIn post, and the Facebook post. As soon as I save that and know that this is enabled, I'm also going to enforce a rate limit just to make sure that everyone has a good experience here. These are just all basic capabilities, but you can actually use this form live and instantly run it as we actually start testing it. So I'll just drop that into the chat in case anyone's curious. No pressure or anything, just wanted to make sure that those that want to actually follow along can. Of course, one other thing that I should probably share with you as well, if you're following along, is the initial prompt that we use. So I'll also go ahead and throw that in chat as well. Now, the first thing that is important to do when actually looking at a workflow after it's generated is just introspect the steps, right? Did it get things right? And in this case, it got the input right. It needs to summarize the blog post or script the post, then summarize the post. As you can tell here, it's actually generated all of the prompts that we would need to be able to do this just without me having to do really much of anything. It's important now, though, that we actually work through the testing process a little bit more. And so what we can actually do is use the test tab over here. I'll call out a few other important things as we're going along, but this is actually a really neat way that you can actually validate things are working as expected and otherwise doing what you expect. So I'll just go to the Copy.ai blog and find a recent blog post that we can use to test this out. But I highly encourage, as you're working through building your own workflows, to iteratively test everything that you're doing, because that's the easiest way to understand what went wrong, what else do you need, and how else do you actually make it better. Of course, it might take a few seconds here for it to actually render the results because it's doing, as you know, quite a bit of things. But the goal here is actually helping you learn how to build a workflow and get a sense for what's possible. Note as well, all I did to get to the test tab was hit test here, and of course this came up. While we're waiting, a few other things that are important to call out is there's actually a chat box at the bottom, which allows you to continue chatting with the workflow. You can use this to add steps or do other things with workflows. In addition to that, if a lot of people actually don't realize this, but this chat history thing actually allows you to get to previous chats that you've had with the workflow. And test results are actually shown here as well. So let's go back to the test tab and look at what happened. So it scraped the blog post. Pretty cool. Gave us a decent summary of the blog post about repurposing your content and how it's important. Gave us 5 unique Twitter posts about the blog summary, 5 unique LinkedIn posts, 5 Facebook posts. Just scanning over these, and we'll probably even just look at the Twitter and LinkedIn posts because they're a little bit shorter. We already know that there is lots of improvements that we can make to this workflow, and that's by design. We wanted to make sure that you have a sense for really what it feels like to start basic and actually continue to build onto a workflow. So one thing we could do to optimize this workflow or make it a little bit better is actually do things like actually adding a summary to then actually use it to support to extract supporting details that reinforce the main point. To do that, I can actually just insert those instructions directly here and then use this to effectively modify a workflow. And so what I'm asking the agent in the background to do is basically continue fixing this workflow for me. My instructions are, I wanted to use a summary and take each key point that is extracted to create some supporting details that reinforce the main point. As soon as I enter, our agent actually does the heavy lifting for you, which means you don't actually have to do a lot of the things that are required with other platforms, right? As an example, manually edit all of these steps, try to figure out where something broke. For things like adding cascading steps, or even the step that we're adding here, you won't have to go back and ideally update any of the other steps because our platform is actually taking care of all of that for you. This actually gives us the ability to continue modifying these prompts and making them a little bit better. So let's see what happened here. It actually added this third step, and it actually determined the best way to actually, or the best place to actually add the step. And I would agree with that, right? Probably after we summarize the blog post, we need to extract the supporting details. It's generated a prompt for that, and it's actually already passed in the blog post summary that we were expecting it to pass in. Now, a couple things to call out here. We can actually think through what editing detail prompts feels like when you can click on any of these boxes, and it'll actually show you the detail steps. There is a few things that are really easy for you to be able to do that you can do, frankly, from this UI. For example, let's say we actually also wanted the scrape of the original blog post. We can just add those instructions here, like scrape original blog post, and then use the hashtag to actually reference the output value from that first step. So all of those will be in scope. You'll actually also have the ability to reference info-based items. We'll talk a little bit more about why this might be important later, but as a hint, think about things like examples that you want to include. You can easily do that, and you can also continue to modify these prompts as well. Now, I notice here that this is a pretty decent base prompt, but I'm expecting that it's going to be inconsistent between runs. So one very simple thing that we could add to ensure that we're driving more consistency is actually something known as a request for structure, or effectively a structure attribute to the prompt. And so what I'll do is copy and paste this in. What I'm telling it is to use this following structure. So use the following structure for your response. And this is just text, right? There's nothing fancy here. It's just a key topic, a 1-sentence summary of the key topic. I'm using brackets to tell it the instructions that I want it to fill in for the actual content that it produces. And I'll go ahead and throw a bullet here to ask it to basically give us a bulleted list of all of the supporting details. And again, we could try without this. I'm just fairly confident at this point. This will probably be something that we'd want to add. Now we can actually come back to the test tab and test yet again. And that is actually a really easy model for ensuring that you're going to be successful at the end of the day. I probably should have published so you could have tested yourself as well. I'll do that on the next run. But what's actually happening behind the scenes again is we are actually maintaining version control for you. So all of the changes that I just made, really is just this one step being added, is not actually something that is live in the workflow yet. In order for that to happen, I'll have to click the publish button. But again, coming back here, we can actually easily test with this blog post URL and get some basics validated. Did it actually use the supporting structure? And while we're actually doing that, we can actually see if the builder did the thing that it needed to do. And sure enough, it actually incorporated the output of supporting details to all of the other requisite steps that we were hoping it would incorporate it in. Now, let's go back to looking at what we were doing here. It looks like the test results came back and I've stalled for long enough. We've got a summary of the blog post. We didn't change anything there. But as we can tell, it actually has done a good job to actually extract supporting details, right? And it's using the actual structure that we had given it. And immediately, we can actually see that it is doing a better job at using some of the supporting details that was extracting, like transforming webinars into blog posts and social media posts, and actually writing some of the output copy that we see here. It's probably more evident in the Facebook posts because they're a little bit longer. Already, we're doing something that is hopefully a little better than what we had before. And we can actually publish this workflow out. And as soon as it's published, you'll actually see the results live within other windows here. Notice, by the way, we have one failed run. Our scraper isn't perfect. Scraping is a science. Oh, that's super cool that we have so many people testing this out. What we can see here, though, is that the reason why this actually failed is because we weren't actually able to get the content of that text. So rather than make up a bunch of stuff, we just said that we couldn't get that web page. Now, coming back to the builder, we could actually add a couple more steps that can make our lives a little bit easier. For example, when we actually look at these outputs, some of the things that I realized is that it's not actually considering, who the reader is, because we never actually gave it a target audience or asked it to come up with its own target audience. And so this is actually one of the things that you could decide for yourself, right? How effectively can AI be used to come up and predict what the target audience for a post like this would be? And in my case, you could say something like add an input for target audience. Of course, that would mean that instead of just taking a blog post, you'd actually have to provide a target audience each and every time. Instead, what we can do is tell it to add a step that determines the target audience for the post and uses it to improve the social posts. Again, just a very discrete set of instructions that are designed to hopefully incorporate a target audience into both the social copy as well as come up with it on its own. The builder is going to think for a few more seconds here and allow us to basically get significantly closer to the whole and hopefully make this content seem a little bit more aligned with what we would expect a target audience to actually care about instead of just a generic post about what this blog post is all about. One other thing to note here is that as you're thinking about editing structure prompts or editing detail prompts, it's actually really simple to be able to come and edit these prompts here as well. And you can make a substantial difference just by providing a little bit more guidance. Twitter posts are probably designed to be a little bit straightforward. But for example, if we wanted LinkedIn posts to actually start with one of the supporting details, we could actually just specify that. Please use a question about supporting details or from the supporting details as a hook for your post. And as soon as I save that and publish it, we would end up getting exactly what we wanted. And what we see here is that it's actually added a step called optimize tone and messaging. And actually, it determined for me that it was going to have me provide a target audience instead of coming up with the target audience itself. We could absolutely try that again and basically revert those changes. That's one of the values of having this button over here. In this instance, let's just keep it because that was the other route that we could go. Maybe it's becoming sentient and understanding exactly the options that I just mentioned to you. As soon as it's published, this is something that's reflected in current state of this workflow. So we can actually go back and test it here again. and give it a few options. Seem to have lost my blog post. So we'll just give it this, and let's just say social media managers. And then we'll test the workflow again, and you can get a sense for really what the outputs of this workflow could look like. But as we're working through this, one of the things I wanted to mention is we are spending a lot of time iterating and testing, right? And we're doing everything one by one, and that is actually by design. The value of doing things iteratively in this platform is it means that you can start simple and, of course, ensure that you're looking at the results each time and understanding how they could be improved. And just by adding these couple of different steps, I'm hoping that we'll actually have significantly more relevant posts here that we were actually trying to create. Let's see, a couple other things to call out. We'll look at the table view in just a second, because we can actually run this at scale as well. But also, it's important to call out, if you are interested in integrating with the API, your workspace key is right here. Every single workflow has an endpoint. If you want to specify your blog post URL and the target audience here, we can actually also generate the code for you. So if you're writing something like JavaScript or Axios, or your engineering team is, you could literally copy and paste and share this with them, and they would have basically everything they need to be able to bring this workflow into where you want to use it. Let's look again at the test view, taking a little longer than I expected, probably because everyone else is playing around with it as well. But we'll give us a couple more minutes here and then jump to the big picture, and also look at a few other examples as well. Nathan, any burning questions that have come up so far?
There's lots of questions around using Infobase in workflows and the capabilities around that.
That is a great question. We covered that quite a bit in our last webinar. I'll be sure to make sure that we have a couple of relevant examples here. But as an example, if I had this handy, what we could actually do is upload maybe like a bunch of example LinkedIn posts that are designed to come from our brand into Infobase. And then we could actually reference it here and say, use the following LinkedIn posts as examples for your output copy. And then just give it a colon and then reference a Infobase item. This can actually also be super effective if you're trying to, like, for example, create a workflow that generates a bunch of stuff from a file or answers questions from a file. We walked through that use case actually last week, though I don't think we'll cover any Infobase, including items this time around, just purely because I don't have the content in hand. Let's look at the output copy this time. Again, it has a step around optimizing tone and messaging, and actually came up with some tone guidelines. Honestly, I need to actually look at what the step's doing. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so it's asking you for the target audience and then coming up with the best tone, language, and messaging to use. Should follow some of my own advice, just trying to do quite a few things at the same time. And it actually did a pretty good job at coming up with a tone here. So as an example, going back to the test tab here, it said, check out the latest blog posts on social media trends. We analyze data from our industry to determine experts that are most engaging on social platforms this year. As social media managers, it's critical to stay on the cutting edge to maximize your impact. It sounds a little bit more like just a social media post itself. So we might actually update the prompt here to make it a little bit more effective. But let's just see what these posts end up looking at. And already we can tell that they're a little bit more targeted. They actually have a little bit more context from the descriptions that we had provided, and are actually sounding a little bit more something that you actually want to post on LinkedIn as opposed to typical AI generated content. Now, we could actually also do something like have it take in a brand voice input and then have it apply that to all of the social post writing steps here. And that's another easy way that you can, of course, continuously improve this workflow as we're enhancing the process around it. While we're waiting on that process to finish, one of the things I was going to call out as well is it's super simple to be able to import an entire section from a CSV. If I actually just go to the demo file that I had, I just had a bunch of blog inputs here. What this process will do is actually allow you to instantly bring in the copy that, or the examples that you actually wanted to run. So I just had a list of like 10 different blog posts, a bunch of Copy.ai and some A16Z, which I like to read. In the first step, it'll just show you the data. It'll then ask you how you want to organize it. So in my case, these are all blog post URLs, and that is how I want to map it to what's here. And that is basically all of the data in the file. So it'll bring all of these in and then give me the ability to specify a target audience. So I'll just say marketers for all of the A16Z examples here, or actually all of the Copy.ai examples here. And we'll say tech enthusiasts for the A16Z examples. Of course, you could have just had this in your file. I wasn't expecting it to add that as an input. We could also have removed that as an input, but again, sake of time here, just want to show you how you could even do this. By hitting the run all button, we'll actually process all of them at the same time. And it's literally that simple to be able to build a workflow, get it to at least an acceptable point, and then immediately start running it so that you can actually not have to reinvent the wheel. And while we're waiting on that to come back, it actually went ahead and added the brand voice input that we were hoping it would add. And then also, I'm hoping actually incorporated it into the optimized tone and messaging section to actually give us what we want. And we could actually update this if we want and incorporate maybe a little bit more guidance and have it just some tone guidelines. In this case, we've already added brand voice as an input, so I don't really know if the step is going to be as relevant anymore, but you kind of get the idea, right? There's a lot of ways that you can continuously improve workflows and make it really simple for you to be able to incorporate these best practices. Now, in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we cover off some of the other things and recap what we just learned, as well as show you a few more magic tricks that we have up our sleeves. And coming back to really the learning portion of today's webinar, you can totally do this, right? It's very simple to start with simple prompts and continuously improve. We showed you a few examples of how you can do that. Hot tip is iteratively test everything that you're doing, because that's the easiest way to know where something went wrong. Of course, we probably want to look at each single step that we're updating and validate any updates that we're asking the builder to make, just to make sure it did what I expected. We already saw an example of that where it didn't do exactly what I wanted, but was actually an alternate path that would have gone. Typically, being more specific about what you want it to do, it should get you closer to the outcome that you're looking for. We talked a little bit about editing step prompts and how you can actually improve those prompts yourself. We only edited one of them and added a structure attribute, but certainly we'll be sharing a lot more tips and tricks on how you can actually edit step prompts in more detail as well. And then structure prompts was one of the main things that we had discussed today. This is an easy way that you can actually, effectively drastically improve your outputs by actually giving structure to individual inputs so that when things are used later, we're closer to the outcomes that we want. The goal here is actually to take you from this Drake to the best Drake. Ultimately, we probably could have started with the prompts below, right, that has a little bit more context in it and actually is calling out, summarizing the blog post step that we added, as well as, or the extract information step that we had called out, as well as the determine target audience step. But again, for all of you that are just early in your journeys, there's a lot of ways that you can actually continue to build out workflows. And you don't have to start with all the complex prompts that we show you as a part of the magic that we have, because of course we've spent a lot of time building on Copy.ai. But through these sessions, we're hoping that we get you closer to the Drake that we all want to be. All right, that's it on slides. This is really a section that I think is important because everyone also asks us, how are you using Copy.ai? How are you copying AI internally? And the second section here of demo use cases we're going to walk through might be a little bit harder for you to follow along with. I'll try to make them as easy to understand as possible. Know that these are much more complicated prompts, but hopefully it provides some inspiration in terms of how you can actually use our product. And boom, check it out. All of the individual 10 runs that we had for all the blog posts have actually been updated. So let's actually start with a fresh workflow here. One of the things that we actually covered last week was how you can actually do things like automatically extract insights from sales calls. We in fact looked at this workflow that we had, which actually just takes in a transcript. And let me go back to the builder here. Does everything from summarizing the call, extracting use cases, extracting competitors, extracting important people, extracting questions asked, questions unanswered, tech stack, pretty much all of the things, plus write a follow-up email that are going to be critical for us to be able to do a lot of the things that we do here. Now, what we're using this workflow for is a number of things, but some of the coolest things we're using it for is actually updating Slack automatically every time a sales call ends, so that everyone in the company can have a good understanding of what was discussed. And if I'm a marketer or someone that's not on as many calls as someone on the sales team, I can actually have an intuition on what people are discussing, what use cases they're interested in, all of the magic that you would have to automatically update all of the content within our Salesforce. So one of the greatest things about working at Copy.ai is I don't actually spend much time working on doing those kinds of activities. Now, this is something that we covered last week. So if you're interested in learning how you can build a workflow similar to this, be sure to check out last week's recording. But there's a lot of other ways that we could use transcripts as well. And at this point, you probably all know that we do a lot of webinars. And actually week after week, our marketing team of 4 people has to do an incredible job and an incredible amount of legwork in order to get these assets created and basically do all of the minutia of content repurposing thereafter. Got to get it on YouTube, got to figure out all the transcripts, got to effectively process all of this in order to be able to create other assets. And that is a common problem within marketing. So how do we actually do that today? Instead of it taking one person all week with workflows, it just takes a few minutes. Let's build a workflow that's designed to take a webinar transcript instead of a sales call transcript and actually do all of the content repurposing that we need out of it. There's an internal workflow that we have here that we're modeling this off of. Of course, that one's been refined a bit. But let me actually show you a much more complicated workflow. And here, this will actually be a little bit hard to follow. So let me do this. I will, instead of trying to create all of the formatting within the box here, I'll just bring up a new Notion window and we can actually look at what the text of this prompt was while it's building. Coming back here, the input given a text transcript to a webinar, we're asking it to summarize the transcript, note all of the key topics that were covered, along with provide 1-sentence summaries of each topic. We then want it to use the summary and the key topics to review the transcript again and extract specific timestamps where these topics are initially discussed and output the topics associated with the timestamps. All of this is in order to do something that's really important for our marketing team and probably more important to you as well. Write a YouTube video description that's designed to be SEO optimized and has timestamps and callouts of all of the topics and where they were discussed. Then we're going to do something that is actually also really effective for content repurposing use cases, which is get an understanding of all of the use cases that were discussed, and then actually create some narrative LinkedIn posts that would allow us to, after creating little snippet videos, post those LinkedIn posts without having to do a whole lot of work. In that time, our workflow has actually already been built. And just think about how long it would take you to try to do something like this yourself. And in fact, we can actually go ahead and test this out immediately. I've got an older webinar that we had run a while ago, just the transcript to it. And I'm just going to test it by giving it the entirety of the transcript. And as we'll see, this is not a clean transcript, right? This is a classic Zoom transcript. It just has a whole lot of timestamps and a whole lot of information in it. And that's the only input to this workflow. Behind the scenes, while we're waiting on this test to run, we can actually look at what it came up with, right? So first thing, of course, it wants to summarize the topics. It has taken a lot of the structure prompts or the original prompts that we had to understand what a summary would look like. One other thing I didn't mention before, but you can also edit. This is using the role task framework. So there's actually a prompt background here where it's defined exactly who we're asking the AI to act as expert in summarizing the topics that are within a blog post. Probably not a role on our website, but one that we can define here. It's then going to extract the topics, and we gave it some instructions, right? Output each topic on a new line in the format topic and summary. So whereas before we had to add the structure prompt, by providing a little bit more guidance in the prompt itself, the builder prompt itself, it'll actually do that for us. It'll then extract all of the topics timestamps, and it's actually also created a format for that. It then has a prompt about writing the video description, then the use cases, then the LinkedIn posts. So let's actually take a look and see if tragic, looks like the test maybe got lost as I was clicking around. I'll run this workflow. And while we're waiting on those outputs, we can actually test out a few other capabilities here as well. So I'll actually show you how you can also manually run anything through the task. You don't have to upload a CSV. You can actually just hit new row here. And this is both very useful for me as it relates to webinars, or as it relates to demos and whatnot, but also really useful for your testing. In fact, sometimes I like to use this to repeat some of the tests that I'm doing so that I can actually look at the results between sessions and be able to basically review both outcomes. Did I make it better or did I make it worse without having to lose all of the inputs in the process? But Again, that's just something that's happening in the background. So hopefully we see the results of this one left. Keep in mind, this is a pretty meaty task that we're asking it to process because we've given it, I don't know, an entire hour-long webinar's worth of words. And you probably know by now I talk a lot, so it's quite a few words. In this case, we're hoping that it's actually able to process all of this at once. While we're waiting on that, let me actually see if it's going to come up because I don't want to confuse anyone, but let's actually multi-thread it and build another workflow at the same time. This is a little bit more complex of a workflow as well, but it's for a totally different audience. One of the things that we've actually mastered internally is doing a lot of things with LinkedIn information. Some of those things are writing outbound emails that are personalized to each and every prospect, but actually another way that you can actually leverage LinkedIn data is actually to do something that we all know and probably don't love, known as enrichment. A very meaty prompt and has a bunch of numbers and formatting that didn't actually copy as cleanly as I would have hoped. So I'll paste it here again to give you a sense of what is actually happening. But the input for this workflow is a LinkedIn post. And what we're asking it to do is come up with, a brief description of our company and come up with their current company, their current role, their previous company, what their previous role was, highest level of education, what technologies they have experience with, draft a professional summary of their work experience. In fact, while I'm reading this, probably should just hit enter here and think about what their current role is and what reasons they might have and what challenges they might have on a day-to-day basis that would make our product relevant. Then actually use the understanding of our company to understand their challenges and role to draft 3 reasons they might be interested in the product. Since we've actually already extracted their current company, search for recent news about their current company and come up with a few bullet points that you might find based on what might be interesting, and then finally draft a few icebreaker questions. Now, I know that was a lot. Most enrichment workflows probably don't do nearly as much, but we actually have access to AI and we're already going to process a LinkedIn profile anyways. So this could be the kind of thing that makes it really easy for you to be able to actually get a whole lot more valuable information and actually something you could use as a part of a call without having to reinvent the wheel. This one also will take a bit of time to run. Oh, wow, that was actually really quick. Let's review this one and then we'll jump back to see what the results look like for the other guy. It understood the input as a LinkedIn URL and company description. It knows it needs to scrape the profile. It's generated all the prompts that we would expect for these relatively simple questions. What's their previous company? What's their previous role? Highest level of education, technologies, role challenges. What are the reasons that they might be interested? It has taken into account the role challenges for this one. And it's actually also taken into account the role for the other prompt here as well. It actually also knew to pull in the company description into the draft, the reasons why they're interested. It's incorporated a search step to actually go find information about the company news, and then it's going to use that to draft some icebreakers. That is a super meaty workflow, and let's go ahead and publish it and give this a run. I'm going to import CSV again. The way that we'd actually probably want to use this workflow is here. I can just manually copy and paste those as well. When we actually are running this at scale, this is actually integrated directly with our Salesforce. So one other cool thing that you might not know about the builder is in the runs view is as long as you have rows to paste something, you can actually paste multiple things at once. So I'm going to create a bunch of rows here and just hit go. And boom, now we've got all of the data that I wanted to run and it's available here as well. When I hit the run all button, we can run them all at once. And that's another little tip that you might not realize when you're trying to run a few different runs at the same time. Now, while we're waiting on this one to run, let's actually jump back and see what happened to the webinar transcript workflow. So let's check it out. It summarized the topics. This one was the brand voice webinar that many of you may have been on a few weeks ago, but it covers the key topics, right? We know that we talked about brand voice, we talked about info-based, we talked about AI workflows. Those were generally the 3 things that were most important. We could ask it to be a little bit more specific here, but those were, if I remember correctly, basically the exact 3 things that we discussed. It actually did a really good job from the get-go of understanding the topic and summarizing it with 1 sentence. Again, this was something that we had explicitly asked it to do as well. It then went back and actually took each of those points and gave us explicit timestamps where each of those things were discussed. And then it used all of that to write a video description. Learn how to establish consistent brand voice, build an info base, and implement your AI workflows in your business, and actually pulled in all the timestamps and asked us to watch the full webinar to gain actionable insights and strategies to level up our business. pretty good. We could probably incorporate some keywords here, but honestly, this is mostly what we're after, just getting it to look right on YouTube and have all the things that we were hoping it would have. And then, of course, it actually did a really good job of analyzing the use cases here. One other thing that I didn't call out, by the way, if you hover over a line here and just hit the left sidebar, you can actually see all of the topics or all of the outputs, probably read them a little bit easier. So as we can see here, it did that for that use case, and then actually also already gave us all of the information that we would want for extracting use cases and actually coming up with the appropriate audiences for each of these use cases as well. And it actually used a structure to be able to do this. Finally, it actually drafted a LinkedIn post here. That seems to be the one thing that it was off on from that original prompt. We would like a LinkedIn post for each use case, but frankly, we could go back to the builder and say something like, draft a compelling LinkedIn post. We actually see the mistake right here, sharing one of the use cases. Draft a compelling LinkedIn post sharing each use case in a way that caters to the audience, derive value from it, identified above, use the webinar summary as context. As soon as we publish that, that's live, and frankly, we could come back and rerun those steps and come back to it. Let's see how it did for the chat to workflows example. This was actually one that we did just a few weeks ago. And you probably remember the use cases if you were there. Product description generator, generate LinkedIn outreach campaigns, support knowledge base, and an onboarding form, which are literally the 4 things that we built on that webinar. So it's pretty unreal what you can actually do with highly unstructured data like transcripts. And the idea here is really think through how you can leverage our platform, even with giant messes like this that are probably spending you're probably going to spend a bunch of time manually processing. Coming back to the sales enrichment workflow that we just ran, we can actually take a look at what it was able to do. And without making any edits to it, it actually did a really good job of actually extracting all the information. There's no order or magic to any of the LinkedIn URLs that I had grabbed. They were literally just the handful of people that were at the top of my feed this morning, so don't read too far into it. It actually also did a good job of extracting all of the current roles, the previous company, the previous roles as well. And also, this is just key value information, so it's probably pretty easy, but it's a really powerful way to think about using the extract step. You can actually also combine it, like we did later in this workflow, to actually generate something like a search that is going to be a much more useful asset at the end. We've had it draft a professional summary. This is from one of my friends, Richard, who's a proven IT leader with over 13 years of experience at Amazon, currently serving as a senior manager of solutions architecture for their ISV division. Shout out to Richard, you're badass. And we actually met just a few weeks ago. So LinkedIn is probably spying on wanting to refer to me content that people I've recently looked, whose profiles I've recently looked at. What's really cool about this professional summary field is that this is actually super useful to have in Salesforce. It can actually, what we do internally is actually it sends us a message telling us before a meeting who we're meeting with. And rather than having to go and manually scan someone's LinkedIn, we actually just have our platform, or actually our notification platform, automatically do that with Slack. It's drafted a few interest reasons here as well, so we can actually review those. We can help manage technical depth and breadth of solutions architects by providing on-demand access to the latest AWS service information and recommended architectures. Absolutely something that we could do from an ingestion perspective. Keep in mind, it also doesn't have all of the context in our product. So if we had actually had, to go back to a question from earlier, this would be a great place to incorporate Infobase, where we just have a list of use cases that our product can address and have it predict which use case might be most relevant to a person. It actually also went ahead and did the search here. I imagine there's probably a lot of information on Amazon, but we look at some of the other icebreakers it came up with, it noticed that it actually found on Mark's profile that they recently got funding from Databricks Ventures. This is the amazing thing that anyone would love to have at the beginning of a sales call. Of course, we could update this workflow and make these a little bit more specific or incorporate other data. And this one's talking about Catalyst's progress and then the fact that he was named one of the first 100 customer success leaders and asking him a question related to that. Even honestly, a news summary of all of the things we learn about a company would be independently really useful. That is hopefully a very quick walkthrough of some of the things that you can do with workflows that you may not have even known. What you'll notice here is that throughout this session, we've actually tried to use a lot of the actions that we have out of the box. And so all of those are really designed to make it easier for you to solve the complex problems. And actually, you can use those as a backdrop to think through how to better structure your prompts. Now, after the session, we'll share a few other things, but one of the things that I found really most useful for a lot of folks when they're first getting started is just this slide. We shared it at the last webinar as well. And honestly, it just shows you where to click. So there's no rocket science here. I walked through all this at the beginning of the webinar, but it might make it easier for you to be able to understand. We'll actually also share some best practices that might help you get the most out of our product. One other thing that might be useful that we actually covered in office hours today, or this week, is a simple exercise of actually how we can improve prompts by iteratively asking ourselves these questions. So I'll be sure to share this out as well with everyone, and hopefully that is helpful to you as you build your own workflows. Okay, Nathan, how are we doing on questions? I wanted to save at least a few minutes to make sure that I can address anything that came up.
Yeah, the questions, people were just hoping to get access to those if they were going to have the templates the prompts that you use that you ran in this, if they'll have the examples that were run, if they can actually use them. Yeah,
in fact, as a little homework assignment, would love to get your feedback on how you can improve these. They're not perfect. They actually are loosely modeled off of the ones that we are actually running in production, but know that first process that we walk through, there's no magic in a builder prompt that is going to completely get rid of the need or desire to actually fine tune each of the individual prompts. This is something we covered in a previous lesson. I just actually dropped the long-winded transcript webinar use case that we walked through into the chat. And if you have a webinar transcript lying around, you can definitely try that out. And then here is the other one that we had walked through that just was basically doing sales enrichment for us. Would love to hear from all of you in a future session of, oh, oops, I just realized I only shared this with hosts and panelists. So let me share it with everyone. And let's actually also share the enrichment workflow with you as well. Okay, I think this one actually is too long to paste into the chat. I just keep getting a click from Zoom. So we will be sure to share that one afterwards. As a reminder, it's pretty long-winded. If anyone wants to screenshot it, you're welcome to do that now if you're burning to try it out. Nathan, any announcements that we wanted to cover as well?
I think people were curious about office hours, so I just wanted to mention that in the follow-up email, we'll add the link to that, and we'll make sure to get that out. And then big announcements that we have is just officially launching this. So everybody here is ahead of the curve right now. If they start using it pretty immediately, it's like a nice little advantage. I like to think of it as. So nice ahead of the curve and getting started early.
Indeed. And we're really excited to continue doing this to teach you the best practices. I would also love your feedback as well. So if there's something that we didn't cover in today's session or something else that you'd like to see in a future webinar, let us know. And we're really happy to try to make sure that we're accommodating our audience and making sure that you get the best and latest tips. And I don't know where I was really going with that. The thing. If there's no other questions, Nathan, probably want to give folks, I was going to say 20 seconds back, but it seems like we have taken up the full hour. So
yeah,
thanks for
awesome.
thanks for spending time with us. See you again next week. Actually, I won't be seeing you next week because I am going to be on vacation, but Rob is going to be back and we are going to run another great session.
All right.
Thanks.
See you, everybody.
Later.